Merry Christmas, everyone. Welcome back to Daily Dose of Septuagint. Hope you've had a great time celebrating Christmas. And once more, we have Patrick Schreiner with us this morning to take a look at Matthew's use of Hosea. Welcome, Patrick.
Good to be with you. Hopefully, people aren't tired of me by now.
Yeah, hopefully not. Hey, we can continue this after Christmas week.
There you
We're
go.
going to get right into things. So, welcome and again, Merry Christmas to you all. The fourth major passage where Matthew's birth narrative draws upon the Old Testament, and arguably the most debated one, is Hosea 11:1. So we'll take a look at it in the Old Greek, and that's where part of the controversy lies. Then we'll look at Matthew's form and then have a conversation about the implications. Diati nepios Israel, ke ego egapesa auton, kai ex aiguptu metakalesa ta tekna autu. Well, let's start with this diati. This means since or because. And then we have nepios, and that is going to be a child, perhaps an infant, very little child, and Israel. So notice there is no express, like a me or something like that. This would just be a predicate position with the nepios. So since or because Israel is a child or infinite. And then we have a kai ego. So you could even translate that less so much as sort of an and more like even I. Agapesa, this is from agapao, first singular aorist active indicative. I loved him, referring back to Israel. So despite the fact that he was just a baby, I loved him. Then kai ex aiguptu, from Egypt, metakalesa. This is from metakaleo, first singular aorist active indicative. Once again, this means to summon, or it's a fancy form of call, I suppose. I have called, and Aquila and Theodotion instead use ekalesa without the meta on the front end, so keep that in mind. We're going to come back to that here in a bit when we get to Matthew. So they have the simpler form, and in fact, that's probably a better rendering of the Hebrew that we see in the Masoretic, assuming that's what the translator has. And then lastly, we have ta tekna autu. I have summoned his children, once again referring back to Israel's children, and that's where things are quite interesting. The Masoretic text has my son, so it has a singular here and a first singular pronoun. It's beni, it's my son. Aquila and Theodotion, and actually a form of Symmachus as well, it doesn't quite look like this, has huion mu. Notice it's son here as opposed to tekna, and it's my first singular as opposed to this third singular. So the Semitic tradition largely, instead of having I have summoned, or I have summoned his children, instead says I called my son. And on that note, then, let us take a look at Matthew's version in Matthew 2:15.
The fourth fulfillment quotation is found in Matthew 2:15. This is a famous one where he quotes Hosea 11:1, out of Egypt I have called my son. And you've looked at the Septuagint, and the Septuagint, as you noted, says tekna, his child. And then I think it has a compound verb there as well, that's slightly different.
Right,
And so
yes, it's actually his children. Yeah.
that's right, his children. That's right. It's in the plural there. So it seems that this is actually a non-use of the Septuagint. He seems to be going back to the Hebrew text, which actually has son here.
Right.
And so when he quotes it, I've called in Greek it's ton huion mu, my son. But the question becomes, how can Matthew quote from Hosea 11:1? Because if you go back to Hosea is prophesying in the 8th century to northern Israel, confronting their idolatry. In Hosea 11, he's actually speaking about in the past, like God has loved you in the past. Out of Egypt, he called his son. Like he's not going to, I think the point is, he's not going to forsake you because he's chosen you. And then Matthew looks at that and he's like, oh, yeah, out of Egypt I have called my son. Hosea said that, but Hosea is referring to the past. And now he comes and he puts this in Matthew 2:15. And the context is, Jesus and his family, Mary and Joseph, they're fleeing from Herod because Herod's trying to destroy them. And so they flee into Egypt. And Matthew then picks up this quote in 2:15 saying, just as Israel lived in this, I'm now interpreting, just as Israel lived in Egypt or were in slavery in Egypt, now the new son is in Egypt and will be called out of Egypt. So out of Egypt I have called my son. And so the troubling thing for some people about this quote is the fact that Hosea 11:1 seems to be retrospective and not, what we just looked at with Micah was this is a forward prediction
Right.
that someone will be born. In Hosea 11, it's looking backwards. But I think what's happening here is, in Exodus 4, it speaks of Israel as my firstborn son. And what
Mhm.
Matthew has done is he set up his whole narrative as Jesus walking in the footsteps of Israel. He is the new Israel. And therefore, when Matthew reads Hosea 11:1, out of Egypt I have called my son, even though that's retrospective, he recognizes that Hosea also, I think if you go down, others have pointed this out to me. I think it's verse 11. It says, "They shall come trembling like birds from Egypt." He recognizes there will be a future exodus actually from Egypt.
Right.
Hosea 11:11. So in the very context of this chapter, Hosea is recognizing there was a past out of Egypt I have called my son, and there will be a future out of Egypt I have called my son. So I don't think Matthew's just grabbing at any text. He's saying the prophets, and if you read through all the prophets themselves recognize we talked about this in the first video. These patterns will repeat themselves, and so there will be multiple exiles, and there will be multiple exodus out of exile. And that reality actually happened in the life of Jesus. One thing I like to point out to my students, though, is what's interesting here is there is reversal, though, too, because, in the Exodus, they go into Egypt for safety, so there's parallels there, but it becomes a place of slavery, and so they must come out of Egypt. What's interesting here is Jesus and his family are actually escaping Jerusalem, and they're going
Right.
into Egypt for safety. And so there's somewhat of a reversal of places. It's almost like Jerusalem, because of King Herod is like Pharaoh, has become Egypt, and
Yeah.
Egypt has become a sort of Jerusalem. And so
And
it's
he's an emissary of Rome, so it's a different oppressor, but it's the same vibe, right? I mean, it's
exactly. Yeah. And so there's, whenever you think of fulfillment, it's not always going to be exactly the same. There will
mhm.
be changes that occur here. And I think this is a condemnation upon Jerusalem and how they're receiving their Messiah. And if you trace Matthew's gospel as a whole, actually, Jesus does most of his ministry, at least in Matthew, in Galilee. And
Right,
when he returns to the city of Jerusalem, they crucify him.
right,
And so you've kind of got these bookends in Matthew where, Herod wants to kill him at the beginning and then he returns to the city at the end. And we actually know from John, he went back and forth a lot, but Matthew portrays it as the whole middle part is really Galilee.
right.
And so Jerusalem is antagonistic towards their king. And that's not holistic. There are people within Israel, obviously, who accept him, but the city and the people of the city are not accepting their Messiah. So again, I don't think Matthew is playing fast and loose with Hosea 11:1. I think he's recognizing this is what fulfillment is. There's patterns that Jesus must fulfill as the Son.
Yeah, yeah. So with this one, yeah, I completely would be on board with all that. What I find so interesting about this one is it's been such a stumbling block for probably folks in the pew, but especially certain scholars who you've read more Matthew commentaries than me. But I'm surprised at how many would say that this is like a misquote of Hosea 11:1.
Yeah,
Matthew's playing fast and loose with it because Hosea is not a messianic prophecy. It is, as you pointed out, a retrospect. And I like what you're saying. It's just doing a totally different thing.
hmm,
But why do you think so many good scholars end up thinking that this is some sort of misquote of a non-messianic proof text, as opposed to seeing what I think is a pretty fairly obvious Jesus is repeating the history of Israel. You got the genealogy, you got this, you have the wilderness temptation, you've got
that's
the
right.
Jordan River, you've got the mountain teaching of the law and all that kind of stuff. So why do you think folks go wrong there? I mean, you're a hermeneutics guy partly.
Yeah,
What's wrong
yeah.
with their hermeneutic?
Yeah, I mean, many people who say these things are way smarter than I am, so I don't want to assume that I have it all
But
figured out. But
they're not on this video. So
they're not watching this.
well, that's probably
But
true
I
too.
would say my tendency is to think people have a certain sort of box that they put fulfillment quotations in, and this doesn't fit it.
Yeah.
And so I would just say you're probably coming to, if this is hard for you, you might be coming to the text with an assumption of what how the New Testament uses the Old Testament. And I would just we believe Scripture interprets Scripture, and it teaches us how to interpret Scripture. So therefore, we have to follow the Scriptures themselves in how they view fulfillment theology and
Yeah.
fulfillment quotations. So I think the failure probably of even evangelicals here is to read more as a proof text and not as a pattern.
Yeah.
If we can use two P words, right?
No, yeah, and I use the pattern terminology in other writings. I think this is less a point to point
Yeah.
prophetic kind of thing, and it's a pattern repeating itself.
Another way to put that is we've maybe made our hermeneutics too mathematical.
Yeah.
Reading a piece of literature is more dynamic, and so if we view these fulfillment quotations as kind of 1 to 1 equals 2,
Yeah.
it's probably not, we're taking the hard sciences and transferring them over to the soft sciences. So there's a lot going on behind this that I think we need to look at what Matthew's doing. I do want to start with the idea that I don't think he's misinterpreting it, and then follow him in what and how he interprets. And that just it gives us a little more breathing space in terms of a little more flexibility. And I don't mean flexibility in a bad sense, but actually in a good sense to say, wow, there are patterns within the Hebrew Bible, within the Septuagint that we need to be paying close attention to, because Jesus on the Emmaus Road, he doesn't identify all the texts that speak of him.
Right. Yeah.
And so he wants us to go and search for ourselves. This is the task that we have, to see him as he's revealed in redemptive history over time. And so I think that actually gives us a task to go and do something.
Last thought I would have. We mentioned we touched on it but didn't dwell on it. Previously this week we looked at places where it's very clear, like Parthenos in Isaiah 7:14, that Matthew is indebted to a Greek tradition. Here, if you were to use the Septuagint, which says "my children," it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
And so either he's retranslating from some sort of proto-Masoretic tradition, or there's already a Greek tradition running around, and we see that later reflected in Aquila and some of the other editors later on, that has already fixed it, so to speak, and they've given a Greek text that would say huios as opposed to the plural techna.
Right.
So he goes from Septuagint to some weird modification of it from Micah to now non-Septuagint. So you've written about Matthew being a scribe, etc. What explains that? Didn't he just have the Septuagint Reader's Edition edited by Greg Lanier and Will Ross on his desk, and he's just using that? Why is he now not doing that?
This is where you're a better expert than I am, Greg. I want you to answer this question. I mean, I don't know. It seems that I would guess that he has we think we live post-printing press and everything's all nicely lined out for us. What did Matthew have in front of him?
Yeah.
we just don't know. We do have evidence here that maybe he had some sort of Hebrew text in front of him. I mean, you go to the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Qumran, and they're copying these texts, and they're copying them in Hebrew, and we have so I would just say he probably has a diversity of texts in front of him. Yeah. And that's not, there's libraries in that time. There's good work being done on the synoptic problem that different authors are probably having multiple drafts in front of them of the different gospels, and they're writing on wax tablets and so forth and so on. So yeah. I would just say, I don't know how to answer that. You might have a better answer than I do, but we probably need to recognize that it's not like Matthew just maybe has one text. These were readers of the scriptures. They cared about manuscripts. It's way more probably complex, and I don't think we give Matthew enough credit. Even very early on, is it Pliny that talks about in Eusebius that Matthew is written in Hebrew, right?
Right.
Nobody's ever been able to prove that, and trying to do the reverse engineering has been unsuccessful. But he wrote in something like the Hebrew tongue. So I would just say this maybe gives evidence of he's pulling from multiple texts, and he doesn't have the goat skin ESV LXX
or Logos. Yeah, and
so what would you say? What would you say though? You're better at this part.
Well, I mean, you've written on Matthew as the scribe. Assuming Matthew equals Levi, he's got this Hebrew side of who he is, but as a tax collector
That's right.
and an educated person, he's got a sort of Greek side of who he is. So that would actually fit if he's a multilingual person, although most of them probably were.
Yeah.
He
You
profiles more like a Paul
yeah,
straddling the two worlds.
that's
He
good.
also dips in and out of both types of textual traditions. So it actually fits with what we know of Matthew. If anyone's going to do it, and what I mean by that is
Yeah, yeah.
Septuagint, what we call Septuagint one place, Hebrew the other place, he would fit the bill. It's plausible within his own like educational
Sure.
background. So
You actually set me up like to with a wiffle ball, like right down the middle in
have
terms of
you written a
scribe
book on
stuff.
Matthew as
And I
scribe?
totally
Yeah.
whiffed on it, and then you told me what I should have said. But yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not
I,
going to
I
put a link to that one in the description. So
I forgot I wrote that book. But there it is true. Like as a tax collector, he would have to make notes. He would
right.
probably have to learn how to write. And so some people are like, "Hey, he wouldn't have been literate, and he wouldn't have been able to write at." But you think about Matthew's education and how he was working. I think you're right. He's interacting in a Jewish and a Hebrew world, and so it's not far
Greek
fetched
world,
to
yeah.
think that he. Yeah, sorry. What did I say?
Well, you can grab this
It's
book
Christmas.
that
Is
was
it
written by
Christmas Day?
somebody about
We're
Matthew as a
confused. That's right.
scribe, and we just won't direct the royalties your way for this one. Anyway,
There you go.
good stuff. Thanks a lot. And again,
Yep.
Merry Christmas, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.